Okay, here we go again. Um, we are again in the midst of providing an overview of this book, which is called The Psychology of Quality of Life, Hedonic Well-Being, Life Satisfaction, Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. My name is Joseph Sergi. I'm the author of the book, and this book is published by Springer. Um, we are in the middle of discussing some of the topics involved in subjective reality and its effect on happiness. This is one of the major parts of the book, and and to give you a further idea of where we're at in the context of that part of the book, this part of the book covers the effect of personality on personal happiness, effects of affect and cognition, effects of beliefs and values, effects of need and need satisfaction, effects of goals, effects of self-concept, and last but not least, the effects of social comparisons. And this is what we're going to be talking about in this module. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on this last topic, the effects of social comparisons on happiness. And the way we're going to talk about that, we'll talk about the impact of social comparisons at large, and then we'll break it down in terms of its various motivational sources on subjective well-being. Okay, let's focus on the impact of social comparison and the evidence that is in the literature suggesting that social comparison does play a significant role in life satisfaction judgments. People compare their situation with significant others, and based on this comparison, may feel better or worse about their circumstance, which in turn influences their life satisfaction judgments. So much research in quality of life and well-being have shown that social comparison uh, does indeed play a role in subjective well-being. Let me give you a example of maybe one or two studies. This one study, for example, provided evidence suggesting that unemployment is associated more strongly with lower subjective well being in regions where unemployment is low than where it is high. And the finding signals a social comparison process. That is, people who are unemployed may feel worse when they compare themselves to others and notice that most of these others are employed. There's another study looking at job satisfaction. The study found that job satisfaction is not a function of absolute level of pay, but pay is relative to other co-workers with the same education and job classification. So people are happy or unhappy with their pay and ultimately their jobs when they compare themselves with others, with their co-workers, and especially those co-workers that have the same level of job education. Education and job classification. And if they are, they're getting paid more, then they feel good about their jobs and their work life, ultimately their life satisfaction, compared to, let's say, if they find themselves to be short in relation to uh, those co-workers, then of course they feel dissatisfied about their jobs, their work life, and ultimately uh, their life in general. Okay, let's talk about motivational sources of social comparisons. There are many sources of standard of comparison that used to evaluate one's happiness. These include comparisons with relatives and friends, associates, or colleagues, who have similar professional positions, people of the same age, gender, and ethnic status, and people who may share some disability or handicap. So it's quite a bit of research on how people compare themselves to those others and how this kind of comparison affects their subjective well-being. Originally, the social comparison theory that originated from social psychology um, proposes that people compare themselves to similar others because doing so allows them to get to know more about themselves. I mean, people gain more knowledge about themselves in relation to others who are just like themselves. Thus, a student compares his grade on the last test with the grades of his classmates. Doing so allowed the student to assess his skills and competencies in relation to his or her peer group. This motive has been referred to by social psychologists as the self assessment motive. But subjective well being is not affected by the self assessment motive per se. The self assessment motive conjoins with other motives to influence subjective well being, and these other motives are the ones that you see in the slide: self enhancement, the self improvement, self identification, and fictitious others. Okay, let's talk about those. Let's focus on the first one, which is self assessment. So, in social comparison, again, self assessment means it's very much related to the need for self esteem. Social psychologists refer to this motive as self assessment, which really captures what they also talk about in terms of downward comparisons. A downward comparison is a comparison of one's own life against another person or group who is less fortunate. Thus, a downward comparison serves to enhance self esteem because the outcome generates positive affect reflective of positive self evaluation. And again, there's quite a bit of evidence in the quality of life uh, well being research that demonstrate very implicitly as well as explicitly the impact of self self enhancement on subjective well being. Well, let me give you an example. There's a meta analysis of 65 effects from 34 US studies that found a moderate positive correlation between socioeconomic status and subjective well being. Again, the implication here is that what people do is for those who are in the higher socioeconomic brackets, they feel good about themselves, and ultimately, those evaluations, those positive self-evaluations, they they spill over on life satisfaction judgment uh, because it's a downward comparison. They're comparing themselves to people at the lower socioeconomic status brackets, and by doing so, that kind of makes them feel elevated, so to speak. Okay, how about the second motive, which is the self-improvement motive? People set goals in life to improve oneself and ultimately enhance one's self-esteem in the future. This motive is referred to as the self-improvement motive. People engage in downward or upward comparison. An upward comparison is self-deflating because the outcome is dissatisfaction. Here the person compares himself with another person or group who is more fortunate. Although the resulting emotion is life dissatisfaction, people do engage in upward comparisons to set future goals. For example, a low income person compares himself with a high income person. Doing so, The low-income person sets his aspirations to work hard to generate more income so that he would become more like the high-income person. And there's so many studies that have, again, demonstrated what we call the self-improvement motive in quality of life well-being research. Moving right along to self-identification. What is self-identification? This motive can be illustrated best by a person comparing his inferior sports performance to that of his home team's performance. On the other hand, he may feel dissatisfied with his performance compared to his home team. However, he may take pride by identifying with his home team's success. This phenomena in social psychology has been referred to as basking in reflected glory. Again, basking in reflected glory. One can think that this phenomena is also a form of social comparison. What people do is put themselves in other people's shoes. What people do is put themselves in, in other people's shoes, and they experience the pleasure or joy that others experience. For example, a person hears that his colleague at work received a promotion and a healthy raise. He feels good about his colleague being promoted and making more money, perhaps much more so than he makes. These feelings may occur as a direct function of thinking himself in the incorporated and his expanded sense of self. Thus, he compares his expanded self of self. His colleague is part of himself with less fortunate others, and in doing so, he feels good about his expanded self. So this is what we call self-identification. And again, there's research that suggests that self-identification is a major factor, or at least a significant factor, in subjective well-being. Last but not least is fictitious occurrences. What is it? What is that? Fictitious occurrences. People judge their current life occurrences against fictitious occurrences of what might have been. Let me repeat, what might have been. Consider the following scenario. A woman watches a show on television. In that show, one of the main characters contracted breast cancer. That the fictitious character's health began to fail rapidly. She was being pronounced terminally ill within 6 months to live. The subject confronted with this information may feel quite sad about her fictitious character. However, in judging her own life, she may feel blessed. That is, her subjective well being is likely to increase as a result of comparing her health with what might have been, as in being struck by breast cancer. Another person who had to change travel arrangements learns that the airline he was originally uh, the flight that he was originally booked on crashed and all the passengers on board were killed. He feels like he had another chance in life. His subjective well being is likely to increase as a function of comparing his situation with what might have been. Might have been in this situation would be killed by the plane crash. And, and as you can see, all those motives play a very important role in social comparisons, and people do indeed make social comparisons in a way that affects their subjective well-being, and plenty of evidence that demonstrate this very explicitly. And this concludes this module on social comparison and the effect of social comparisons on happiness.